What's up, everyone? My name's Daniel from Drafty Sports, and you're watching the Draft Business as Usual podcast. In this episode, I'm going to take you behind the scenes of a new feature that I am working on. It's not currently launched yet, but I want to, in the spirit of taking you behind the scenes on things like this and showing you what it takes to run an auction draft website, we're going to take a look today at everything that goes into expiring an auction. And so the idea here is that I'm launching a new format very soon called a silent auction format. A lot of folks have requested a blind bid format, and I think this is the same thing, but I always thought I would refer to it as the silent auction. I got to get that cursor out of the way because it drives me nuts. Maybe it does you too. Right on my nose too. That was crazy. We're launching a silent auction format, and seemed like it would be a pretty easy transition. We're trying to, me, I'm trying to repurpose the auction draft room as it exists to meet the needs of this silent auction format, because a lot of the mechanisms are the same. The bidding, bidding happens in a very different way. I'm not going to go into that today, but a lot of the mechanisms are similar. So I'm trying to repurpose the existing draft room for the silent auction format. And I want to take you through a lot of the decisions. Again, it seems like it's going to be really simple. The thought of, okay, bidding is finished. Now, how do we expire the auction? And what are the things we have to take into consideration? So in the spirit of pulling back the veil and showing you the complexities of some of these things that are going on, that's what we're going to look at today. I have to remind you, as usual, if you want to be notified when a new episode like this launches, you can follow Drafty Sports on YouTube. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, preferably Twitter. That's where I spend most of my time. If you want to engage with me or just Drafty in general, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments here on the video so that I can answer them here and everyone publicly can see the answer, or let me know what you want me to discuss. If you're wondering about something behind the scenes on Drafty, I'd be glad to discuss any topic that you're interested in. So without further ado, I'm going to flip my screen around and we're going to go, I'm going to show you the code, but just like in previous episodes, I'm not actually going to teach you how to code this thing. I'm using this more of like my notes for what to talk about. So here in my code, I have a function called expire auction. And so actually, I guess something I'm gonna go off script here, and I'm gonna show you some things. Why don't we take a look at what the draft room is currently doing? I gotta get logged in here though, because I didn't plan on doing this. What the draft room is currently doing versus what we want it to do. So if I try a mock draft real quick, like this is for basketball. So let's take a look at what the current auction draft room is doing. Let's add some AI in there and get started. Nominate a guy. All right, Giannis, you're my guy. You're my dude. So what's happening in the auction draft is that bidding is taking place in real time, and then eventually the timer creeps all the way down, and whoever has bid the most at the end of the timer, they win the auction, and they win the auction for the price that they bid. So it's pretty straightforward. And things that have to happen here when we expire the auction is, one, we have to make sure that a bid exists. Two, we have to grab all the team information for the high bidder and store that. And then three, we have to grab the player information and store that. And we move it all to the roster, and things are pretty straightforward. And then we queue up the next player and start the next option. So it's kind of easy to just say and talk about, but what happens when you get into the weeds of things? What I am trying to do with this new auction format, the silent auction format, is this. Let me refresh the page, make sure we get the fresh version. Is this. It is not a live auction format, but rather it is a private auction. Each team submits their own bid, such as $45, or I always put in 45 for some reason. I'm going to go for $50. You can lock in the bid, and then when the timer ticks down all the way to zero, you see the timer right here, when that gets all the way to zero, everyone's bid is locked in and the high bidder is decided. So what I'm trying to do with this, I want people who are new to the auction format um, to not be disadvantaged on Drafty. And so the default way I'm building this is very unique in that if I win this bid, if I win this player for $50 because I have the highest bid, I'm not actually going to pay $50. I'm only going to pay $1 more than the second highest bidder. And so you can imagine, I've seen it a dozen times. When someone's brand new to an auction draft format, they overspend constantly on players that are mediocre. Um, and that in an auction format, that can be extremely detrimental to your overall lineup. So if someone ends up bidding, $45 on a tight end who's on their last leg and is not going to have a good year, but everyone else knows that except this one dude. Um, well, they're out $45 of maybe a $100 or $200 budget. But what is going to happen on Drafty is that if they bid $45 and the second person behind them only bids $13, they're going to win that tight end who is old and decrepit for $14. So that's pretty neat, or it will be pretty neat, but we're still working on it. I'm still working on it. And so why don't we dive into the code like I started to do a minute ago and see what's going on here. So this first bit is just a little bit of analytics. I'm counting how many auctions are completed in each draft room. And then we check the format of this auction, and if it's a regular auction, we go ahead and save it. That's carried over from the original draft room. And what I'm adding here is if it's not a regular auction, if it's a silent auction, we're doing a lot of stuff here. So it seems like a pretty easy thing, like I said, to just figure out, okay, so everybody locks in their bids, and at the end of the timer, we take the highest bid and process it. But if you deal with a free agency fab money in fantasy football or any other fantasy sport for that matter, if you deal with free agency auction budgets or auction bidding, I don't actually know what FAAB stands for, but if you've dealt with that before, you know that part of the fun is being able to see what everyone else bid on the player that you ended up winning. Or maybe you didn't win the player that you wanted, even though you bid an insane amount of money on him because someone else outbid you. And you want to see the breakdown of who bid what so that you can rail on each other and you can ridicule each other when someone bids $100, their entire fab budget, on a guy that no one else bid for. So it's always good fun. So, okay, if we want to show that, we need to make sure that at the end of the auction, we grab everybody's bid, not just the high bid. Okay, so now we're grabbing everybody's bid, not just the high bid, and we need to show that for everybody on like a summary, a list of the bids. And we also need to process that top bid. So let's take a look at processing that top bid. So what this is saying is if there are no bids locked in above 0, then we'll just skip this auction. And so what's going to happen is if no bids are placed, or if no one has placed if everyone locked in a 0 bid, the auction will end early, which is really cool. You don't have to wait till the timer ticks down. If everybody locks in a bid, the auction ends immediately. So that's going to save a lot of time with this format, and that's one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to this format. But otherwise, we're just going to skip this auction and move on to the next player. And so if that is not happening, it means we have a valid bid. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to count how many teams we have that placed bids. We're going to capture, we're just setting up some variables here. And then for each bidder, we capture what their bid is. And then when we get to the next to the last high bidder, we set a value for the price to pay. And I am working this out where in a custom draft room, you will be able to request, I'm going to call it, you can request to disable stewardship. And so what someone bids is what they will pay, which is probably how these blind bid formats mostly work right now when you're doing a blind bid format in your fantasy league today. It probably has that already disabled, but I'm going to enable what I'm calling stewardship by default, and it's that feature that I just described to you, so that you're only paying what the second highest bidder wanted to pay plus 1. So that'll be cool, but we have to figure out what that is. So when it's the next to the last higher, the second highest bidder, we grab that price to pay. And then when we get to, and that's all we do for the second highest bidder, we just grab that price to pay. And then when it is the last person in the list, which is the high bidder, because we sorted our list of bidders by their bid value, when we get to that last bidder, we can grab their information. But wait, we have to do some more, because what if the next to the last bidder and the last bidder have the same bid? So what if the two highest bids are equal? How do we settle that? What are some options? So we could run the auction over again. We could have a tiebreaker scenario, kind of like reverse standings situation, but then that involves having to automate, having to put teams in some kind of order, which means we've got to add more settings to the draft setup, which means also we have to give the commissioner the ability to edit the turn order in the middle of the draft, and then processing that turn order on the fly in an automated way is a lot of handling that we have to do as well. So for my sake, I don't think that that's extremely viable, or at least it doesn't check as many boxes as rerunning the auction checks. So the way I decided to do this is to rerun the auction, and if the auction runs twice and both times it either ends in a tie or well, not if it doesn't receive any bids. If a player doesn't receive any bids, he automatically goes back to the undrafted pool, and we just proceed to the next auction. If we rerun an auction on a player who had a tie previously and he ends up with a tie again, then we do the same thing. We just put that player back. We're going to put that player back into the undrafted pool, and later in the draft, he can be nominated again, or they can nominate him again right away if they want to. And we're just going to wait and draft that player later. So what this is going to end up doing is Drafty is not going to handle tiebreakers. And I'm really excited about that because it means I don't have to program it. And it also means that I don't have to program every what if scenario for each league that comes along wanting to handle tiebreakers in a different way. So instead of allowing for all these custom scenarios to come into play, I'm just bypassing that, and I'm saying, okay, if the same player runs twice and they tie both times, he's just going to go back to the undrafted pool, and he can be nominated later, and we can try again. Maybe everybody's budget will have changed. Maybe you're going to feel differently about a player based on another player that you have since drafted. So you're going to decrease your bid on that player. So it's just it's going to provide a fun variable where you don't necessarily have an opportunity to buy Christian McCaffrey at the top of the draft. Maybe everybody's wanting to spend mega bucks on Christian McCaffrey, but then maybe if he comes up as the 11th guy off the board, maybe by then some other running backs have fallen, some other dominoes have fallen, and you don't feel like you need to bid as high. So that's going to be really fun and really exciting. And so that's kind of what you're seeing here. You can see this dark text. These are my comments. And so when there's back-to-back ties, we just skip this player. And then if that's not true, if multiple bids have tied and we have not already rerun the auction, then we're just going to restart the auction and run this player again. If none of those scenarios come out as true, then what must be happening is that someone has bid at least $1 and won the auction. And so at that point, we can process their bid and do things. And I want to call your attention to this line specifically and just tell you what this is doing. So this is setting the new winning bid as, or it's checking the settings variable disable stewardship. And if that is turned on, it is going to take the high bidder. It's going to grab the bid from that last high bidder, and it's just going to plug in whatever they bid as the winning bid. Otherwise, we're going to be good stewards, and we're only going to force that bidder to pay the price $1 above the second highest bidder. So this one little line of code is doing a lot of logic here and a lot of cool things. And so at the very end, if we get all the way to the bottom, we save the auction and proceed to the next player as we would normal. So kind of crazy how much stuff goes into expiring an auction. We also didn't even talk about the timer situation. We do have to reset the timer back to the whatever in the settings the time limit is set to. Let's see, what else do we have to do? We have to queue up another player, which is a fun struggle in and of itself. Just to talk you through that really quick, it seems like it'd be simple enough. Just grab the next player out of the queue and plug them in, but it's not that simple. What if a player hasn't been nominated? When Drafty first launched, I decided to handle that by automatically nominating the top guy in the rankings. Well, moving into soccer and La Liga and Premier League and a lot of European sports, they don't do player rankings. Apparently, that's a very American thing, and so they sort alphabetically, and so that wouldn't make any sense to nominate the next player alphabetically who wasn't nominated. So what we have to do, if there's no player in the queue, we turn on a little listener to listen to the queue. And so if someone nominates a player to the queue, then it grabs that player and plugs them in as the next player, and the auctions resume. So yeah, we've got to handle the player. We've got to roll the current player off and bring the next player in. And if that player doesn't exist, we have to just wait and listen and wait for a player to come in and then put them on the board. And then for the bidding, we have to save all the bidding that's happened. And for the silent auction format, we have to compare all the bids and take the high bidder and save that to the to the database, and then reset all that bidding. So we have to not only recalculate that team's budget and roster and things like that, which I again did not show you, but we also just have to reset all those mechanisms back to zero so that the next auction comes in fresh. And then lastly, we have to deal with the timer, where it ticks down to zero. That's probably the easiest part. It ticks down to zero, and then when the auction is finished, we reset that back to the full amount, the full duration according to the settings. So that is a quick rundown of kind of behind the scenes what's going on when an auction expires. If you found this to be extremely boring, let me know. Maybe not in the comments. Shoot me a message or tweet at me and tell me what you would like to hear about. Because I love to talk about this stuff. I think it's been a fun experience to build Drafty, and so I'm excited to share it with you and to again pull back the veil. So if you want to subscribe on YouTube, you can be notified when the next episode comes out. I'll be talking about, hopefully, it'll be a couple weeks from now, and it hopefully will be showing you exactly how Silent Auction works, because I plan on launching Silent Auction within the next week into beta, and so it'll be available for mock drafts only. And so hopefully in the next episode, that's what we're going to be talking about, is the Silent Auction, showing you exactly how that works moving through it. So if you subscribe on YouTube, you'll be notified. Otherwise, follow us on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. Again, my name is Daniel. You've been watching the Draft Business as Usual podcast. Take care.